Hi, this is Mrs. Murdoch, and we are going to go over photosynthesis today. But first, what I wanted to do is, because I know you guys just got through studying respiration, let's just do a really quick comparison of the two. All right. So first of all, in terms of what kind of organisms do these two processes, you should know that photosynthesis only happens in organisms that are autotrophs, right? Autotrophs meaning organisms like plants, like algae, like anything that has chlorophyll and the photosynthetic machinery in it. And that can include single-celled organisms like the one floating in my tank over there, or even cyanobacteria, the very rare bacteria that can do it that I've painted up on my wall over there, okay, that did the first photosynthesis on the planet. But autotrophs can do photosynthesis, and only autotrophs, right? Respiration, everything does it. All living things. It's a characteristic of life, meaning that heterotrophs and autotrophs, anything, even if all they're doing is glycolysis and fermentation, even if that's all they can do, everything has to have a way of making ATP from food molecules, right? From the very, very first teeny little cell of all, there had to be respiration, a life process, right? So what this means and what you really need to understand is when you have a plant cell, for example, if I have a plant cell here, a plant cell, if it's a eukaryotic plant cell, okay, eukaryotic plant, realize that it's got chloroplast in it, right? And it also has right next door mitochondria. It's got both of them, right? So I just want to make sure you have that in your mind, that these are very cyclical processes. They actually depend on each other, just like all animals depend on plants to make our oxygen and our food. Even within the cell at the organelle level, the mitochondria is taking the glucose, right, and creating carbon dioxide and oxygen from it. And then those are used by the chloroplast to then make the glucose, right? So this is a cyclical thing even within a plant cell. Both processes happen in the autotrophs. In an animal cell, an eukaryotic animal, right, you have the mitochondria, but no chloroplasts, right? No chloroplast next door. So where is the animal getting its glucose from? By eating plants, right? The glucose comes from this process. Whatever this plant doesn't use and stores is what we animals are eating and what is at the bottom of our food chains, right? And we're also using, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have put oxygen there, excuse me. Oxygen goes over here. Boy, that's a big mistake, sorry about that. We're also using the oxygen to make the mitochondria produce all that ATP for cell work, right? Okay. All right, so I just kind of wanted to show you just an overview of how these two processes are related to each other and how and where you can find the organelles that do these processes as a beginning of this, before we go into really big detail. So now there are a couple of, I'm going to go more into detail about photosynthesis now. So there are a couple videos, let's find them. Here we go. Where is it? Here it is. Okay. There is a video that I have here that goes through the light dependent and other reactions. So we're inside a chloroplast here. And what does that look like to you? It looks an awful lot like a mitochondria, doesn't it? Except it's green, so we're trying to get you to understand that we're inside a chloroplast here and not inside an animal cell. And it looks remarkably like the electron transport chain that you would find in a mitochondria, and that's because it is very much like that. That the photosynthetic process actually starts with an electron transport chain, whereas the respiration process ends with it. So what happens here is they're going to show you in detail what the first and second and third steps are for this. So we're in the light-dependent reactions. So the first thing that you're going to see is light coming in and hitting this green thing here, which is called a photosystem. A photosystem is a bundle of chlorophyll or other pigment molecules, like a little bouquet of flowers. It literally looks like that. And the light is converted into the energy from an electron. So we're back to electrons again, folks. And remember how much the flow of electron energy was important in respiration reactions? They're just as important in photosynthesis. So the true energy conversion here is from photo, light, to the energy of electron breaking free from its molecule and starting to travel through the electron transport chain. And you remember that the electron transport chain, if you combine it with an ATP synthase somewhere, and you pump a little hydrogen into a space, it powers the making of ATP. And that's exactly what happens. The most important thing that happens in photosynthesis is that the energy from that, instead of coming from food molecules, the energy is coming from light. And that's the whole value of photosynthesis, is that the ATP that this little chloroplast is making doesn't come from oxidizing glucose. It comes from light from the sun that's very difficult and diffuse and difficult to catch. And plants have evolved a way to do it, and it's these chlorophyll molecules. So if you look at the video, there's a photosystem. There's a light photon hitting it. And the light activates something which, see, there's a little electron moving away. An electron is moving through an electron transport chain. And you remember that when electrons move this way, hydrogens then are pumped the other way. I think it's going to be, yeah, hydrogens get pumped into the thylakoids, which creates a proton gradient, the same as it did in a mitochondria. That proton gradient can then be used to make ATP. That went a little bit quickly. All right, so if you go back here, hold on. So this molecule, stop. No, stop. There. That molecule there is an ATP synthase, which is taking the hydrogens, and the hydrogens go through it. And again, you're making an ADP molecule into an ATP molecule. Just the way you did in the mitochondria. It's the same thing. Hydrogen flow creates ATP. The difference here is that the ATP made in photosynthesis doesn't get used by the rest of the cell for cell work, the way the mitochondria's ATP did, right? This ATP is mostly just used to power the Calvin cycle, which comes next and actually makes the sugar. So the chloroplast only makes enough ATP in this way to fuel the making of sugar in the second step, which, remember, that's the whole point, is to make sugar from light, right? From your first introduction to this back in the 7th grade. Photosynthesis uses sunlight energy to make sugar. This is the way it does it. So if you keep going, it then shows, you lost an electron from this, right? Like one of those chlorophyll molecules lost an electron. You saw how it left and it went through there. It has to be replaced. You can't just leave that void there. And the electron to replace that electron that was bounced out by the light comes from water molecules. So this is actually kind of a mysterious part of photosynthesis. A lot of people aren't really sure how this works exactly. But water, this little water molecule over here, gets split. And that's where the oxygen comes from the splitting of water, which really is just a waste molecule for the plant. So the oxygen goes to fuel mitochondrial respiration next door, right? And the electrons that come from that break go to replace the electron that got lost here. So water is split. The electron goes to replace the one that was lost, and then the cycle can begin again. And these are called the light-dependent reactions because they can't happen without light coming down and stimulating the process in the first place. So there's light coming down. There's a second photosystem that takes that electron that was already coming through, and this one goes to reduce an electron carrier. Now you remember the electron carriers we learned about in respiration were called NADH and FADH. Remember those guys? And they carried the high energy electrons to a place where they could be used, right? This one is helpfully called NADPH, P for photosynthesis, so it's easily recognized, right? This sort of brown chocolate cookie here. So this is an electron carrier, NADPH. It takes a high energy electron that's coming at the end of this process and carries it to the next cycle, which is called the Calvin cycle, which does the reducing and actually makes the sugar. So there's that one. All right, so then the next part is called the Calvin cycle. You may not have, okay. So we did the light-dependent reactions where we got a couple of products. We got ATP and we got NADPH reduced. So we have high energy electrons and we have some ATP. So this just shows an animation of what we already saw. You made a bit of ATP and you made NADPH, which is carrying high energy electrons. So now you're going to go to the Calvin cycle, which looks remarkably like the Krebs cycle, doesn't it? It's not the Krebs cycle. Calvin cycle goes with photosynthesis. Krebs cycle is in the mitochondria. It's completely different, okay? The interesting thing about the Calvin cycle is now you're taking inorganic carbon, carbon dioxide, and you're adding it in to make an organic sugar. So inorganic carbon dioxide from the air that comes in because carbon dioxide diffuses through all membranes easily, changed into sugar. So this is how the ATP and the NADPH is used to do that. So we're still in the chloroplast. Now we're in the stroma that's next door. NADPH, the electrons are used to reduce those sugars. And what you wind up with is a 3-carbon sugar called phosphoglyceraldehyde. And they're going to go into a bit more detail. So RuBP is this 5-carbon sugar intermediate that's coming up from the last time the Calvin cycle went around. Carbon dioxide comes in and is added so that it becomes a 6-carbon, rather unstable 6-carbon compound. The enzyme that does this is called Rubisco, which kind of sounds like a cookie, but it's a very famous enzyme. It's the only thing that can take carbon dioxide and fix it, make it go from inorganic to organic. The ATP then takes those 3 carbons and destabilizes them. The NADPH puts electrons on them. This makes them go from being acids to being aldehydes, which turns them into true sugars. And then only one of them is allowed to go and then be used to make glucose or make sucrose or do something like that. And the other ones are recycled back into the RuBP that came up from the cycle before. So then the Calvin cycle, when it goes around, it takes 6 carbon dioxides and it winds up making enough 3 carbon sugars to make 6 glucoses. So if you look at the overall reaction of photosynthesis, that all works out stoichiometrically, right? And then that 3-carbon sugar that comes out can be connected to other 3-carbon sugars, which makes a 6-carbon glucose molecule, right? Okay, good. All right, so that is what I wanted to tell you about photosynthesis. You might want to go over that again, but since it's recorded, you can go over it as many times as you like, and it will help if you also do the book work on this, because then you can go at your own pace and figure it out, and we will revisit this again on Wednesday, okay? So don't worry, you'll get it.